folks? It's Dr. Franklin, and I want to talk about the evolution of religion. In particular, in this presentation, folks, I want to talk about the evolutionary psychological perspective. I want to take that perspective and apply it to religion. In other words, I want to talk about why religion continues to exist even though we have a significant rise of atheists, there's a significant rise of nones, and there's a significant rise of agnostics. I also want to take that evolutionary psychological perspective and use it as a means of understanding how religion allows individuals to maintain groups in such a way that leads them to survive and thrive and ultimately reproduce. So listen, if you're interested in understanding how evolutionary theory may apply to religion, this is the presentation for you. I want you to go wheels up with me and let's get into this content. Is God finally dead? The prediction of the death of God has been proclaimed for decades in large part because of the secularization hypothesis. The secularization hypothesis emphasizes that belief in God will fade away as science increasingly shows us that the functions of a supernatural agent, be it impersonal, monotheistic, or polytheistic, will be explained using natural causes. Many believe that as knowledge of the universe increases, including the understanding of human behavior, individuals will no longer need to believe in an all-powerful being who rewards the good and punishes the bad. Some non-theists, such as Dr. Richard Dawkins and Dr. Lawrence Krauss, would like to end religion because it's viewed as immature thought or simply scientifically falsifiable. For many non-theists, religion can be thought to be driven primarily by affect, that's affect with an A, or emotionality, and the selection of certain doctrines and the discarding of others. The predictions of the death of God have been made since the 19th century. Over the past 10 years, there has been a noticeable change in religious beliefs and practices, and this change is not necessarily limited to Europe. Atheists are typically classified as individuals who do not believe in God, but when one considers the notion of believing in God, it may be worthwhile to ask how one conceives of God and to what degree they believe in God. In other words, there are variations of certainty, for example, somewhat sure, absolutely sure in regard to one's beliefs. Nones are individuals who are not religiously affiliated, but many may still consider themselves to be spiritual. This notion captures the essence of Grace Davies' remark about belief without belonging. Finally, agnostics. These are individuals who believe that knowing and coming to know if a God exists is beyond human means. Most of the religious traditions across the country, the U.S. that is on a decline, and it is seen across gender, race, and educational status. Even with the downsized trend of individuals being religiously affiliated, there is still a high belief in God, which is sometimes seen as a counterexample to the secularization hypothesis. Even without the religious affiliation, again, many individuals still consider themselves religious or spiritual. Many individuals surveyed express praying every day and feeling a deep connection with nature as important to them. The generational pattern that is found in secularized countries is that each successive generation of a family tends to be less religious than the previous one. It is important to note, though, that much of the research highlighting the declines in religious affiliations are occurring in westernized, industrial, educated, rich, and democratic societies. The declines often reported are not seen in non-Western, industrial, educated, rich, or democratic countries, or weird countries as a mnemonic. And Christianity, along with other religions, are indeed on the rise in South America, Africa, and Asia. So, given all of this information, is God dead? Is religion dead? Well, given that none still believe in God and that religion is flourishing in other parts of the world, it seems to suggest that God and even religion is not dead in the minds of human beings. Research in a variety of fields suggests that religion and God-related beliefs serve an important survival function in human beings, given that it helps individuals create and maintain human social connections in groups. There have been many theories of evolution, but Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is the most widely accepted as it explains the diversity of life forms we found on our planet. Central features of Darwin's theory is variation, heritability, and selection. So let's start with heritability. Heritability refers to the genetic predispositions that your genes have to interact with the environment and produce traits. For example, in the photograph that I positioned in the slideshow, the neck length of an animal is produced by genetic information. This genetic information comes from both parents, half from mom and half from the father. Sometimes, when this genetic information is passed on to offspring in general, mutations occur. Sometimes the mutations are neutral, and other times, as it relates to my example, it can cause an offspring to have an advantage. So, note the giraffe with the longer neck, he's able to get more nutrition. Sometimes the mutation may cause an individual or an animal species to have a disadvantage. For example, the giraffe with a shorter neck that makes it unable to get nutrition. These genetic mutations, along with other factors like polygenetic inheritance or your genes working in concert with each other to interact with the environment and cause a trait to produce, these genetic mutations cause the abundance of variation we see across different animals and human species. Now, please keep in mind that this is a grossly oversimplified explanation of evolutionary theory. Over time, back to my example, the giraffes with the longer neck will have a survival advantage and a greater likelihood to reproduce and pass on their genetic advantage to their offspring. Over enough generations, what one would eventually see is that giraffes with the genetic variation for the longer neck, they will continue to predominate the overall population of giraffes in a particular area, and the long neck giraffe will become the new norm. Now, overpopulation will spur competition among giraffes, and the animals with the genetic inheritance that allows them to be successful in the environment will be more likely to continue to produce. Natural selection is the mechanism by which nature selects which traits will be passed on to an offspring. In other words, the environmental conditions in which a person lives will cause some animals and species to die because they don't have the physical, cognitive, and emotional resources to survive and thrive, while others will survive and thrive because they do have the physical, cognitive, and emotional resources. It's thought that nature determines or selects the ones that will survive. So, if a trait facilitates survival and reproduction, it's thought that the trait is adaptive. Now, usually when individuals think of natural selection, they consider physiological and anatomical traits only. So, for example, they think about eye color, they think about skin color, hair length, speed, etc. But evolutionary psychology takes this a step further in that it analyzes on an individual level how behaviors and mental processes are traits that are subject to variation and natural selection. So, with evolutionary psychology, we're taking the definition of psychology, the study of mental processes and behavior, and we're combining it with evolutionary theory. So, getting back to my lecture, if psychological mechanisms can be understood to be solutions to particular problems our ancestors face, then all of a sudden our preferences, such as a preference for food, it's thought that that can at least be partially cognitive in nature, can be understood as adaptations that help us to survive today. An example of a preference could be someone's preference for salt. Salt does a decent job of regulating blood pressure when necessary. Okay. Now, many scientists have argued about how much weight to give the evolutionary processes occurring at other levels than the genetic base. In fact, theorists have passionately argued that natural selection only occurs at the genetic level. In other words, they don't take into consideration mental processes and behaviors on a group level, on an individual level, etc. Some theorists disagree and posit that natural selection can occur at the level of the gene, the level of the individual, and the level of the group. So this is termed multi-level selection. 30 years ago, folks, this was very controversial, but it's widely accepted today. Now, consider that there are certain group behaviors that birds engage in that increase their likelihood of surviving and passing on their genetic material. For example, one example could be the warning cries of birds, in that those with the most effective cries go on to survive and reproduce. In groups of human beings, especially in hunter gatherer societies, those groups with higher standards of morality that focused on cooperation and teamwork were more likely to survive and reproduce. The standards occur on an individual level, but it's at the level of the group where the adaptation is taking place, helping individuals to interact with their environments in such a way that leads them to survive and thrive. So, to tie all of this in with the psychology of religion from an evolutionary point of view, religion has important functions in keeping groups of individuals united, cohesive, cooperative. Nature often selects those traits in groups of individuals who espouse certain religious beliefs and or spirituality, because inevitably they go on to survive and reproduce. This does not mean, though, that religion can solely be explained in evolutionary psychological terms. So, if we were to take that approach, that would be very reductionistic in nature. It doesn't necessarily mean that religion doesn't have a dark side, or that everything that is associated with religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs and different types of orientations is associated with positivity and benefits. There are some detriments attached to it. Rather, this entire lecture is emphasizing that the evolutionary psychological theoretical approach can be a means in which we can understand religion a little bit further. Okay.